We've arrived at our final installment of our series on Joseph. If you're just joining us here today, actually, this is the 8th week of a series that we've been in. In this series, we've kind of journeyed through the life of Joseph. And throughout that journey, we've kind of gleaned these truths from his story that if we apply those same truths to our lives, like there should be some life change happening. And I don't know about you, but I know definitely that's occurring in my life. Like applying the truths that we're learning has been a beautiful thing over these last 8 weeks. And I'm excited to be with you as we kind of wrap this up here today in this story. But my hope is still this, that as we walk through this kind of final chapter of the story, that you still leave changed. That the truths that we reveal here today, that God is using, can change your lives. This journey's been wild, okay? It's been from the pit to the prison to the palace. It's from betrayal to forgiveness to restoration. Like, we've seen it all. And as we come to these final chapters, I need to kind of point something out that might surprise you a little bit. The writer of Genesis spends very little time on Joseph's glory days in Egypt. We don't get mostly details about his administration or his building projects. Instead, the camera kind of pulls way back. And in fact, if you read through Genesis 46 through 50, and last week I gave you a homework assignment of about 4 or 5 chapters, and if you didn't do that, now you've got about 10 chapters to read through. But today we're going through Genesis 46 through 50. You'll notice something, and that's that Joseph almost kind of becomes a supporting character in his own story. There becomes to be this focus that shifts to his father Jacob, to his brothers and their fear, to blessing and promises that stretch far into the future. Why? Why is this the case? Why is this how it ends? Well, it's because the Bible wants to show us that our lives aren't just about our personal victories or defeats. They're about how God's faithfulness ripples through generations. It's much bigger than just us. Your story doesn't end with your pain or your success. It ends by pointing to the God who redeems it all. This morning we're going to look at 4 scenes as we walk through these final chapters. These scenes show us, they give us marks on how we can finish well. So let's start with scene 1, which is found in Genesis 46. Jacob is an old man. He's living in Canaan, the promised land. And this is the place that God promised to give his family. Like, not only him, but his entire family after him would have this land. And now, because of famine, he's being summoned to leave it all behind and go to Egypt. Now, let that sink in. I don't know if you have like a sentimental bone in your body, but if someone has given something to you, if someone special has given something to you, it makes it harder to give away, right? So imagine if God gave you something, that God himself said, this is for you. Not only is this for you, this is for all your children and all their children, so on and so forth. The idea of having to give that up, that's where we find Jacob in this moment. This idea of having to give up what God has already promised him. To him, Egypt wasn't like a vacation. Like, he wasn't just going there. He's like, I'm going to do a little cruise on the Nile. Like, it's going to be a good time. Like, that's not what his mindset was at all. Actually, he's like, this is exile. Like, this isn't home. This is home. Canaan is home. This is where I want to be. But instead, he has to leave, and he has to go to Egypt. In fact, Egypt, not only is it a place of exile, it's a place of slavery. It's a place of oppression for his people. This wasn't just moving for Jacob. This felt like abandoning the promise that God had given him. But look how he handles this crisis. Look at Genesis 46, verse 1 through 4. So Jacob set out for Egypt with all his possessions. He took everything. Like, he didn't just take like a bag with like some things, like, I'll be back. No, he took everything. And he starts heading out. And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. During the night, God spoke to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he called. Here I am, Jacob replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation. I will go with you down to Egypt, and I will bring you back again. You will die in Egypt, but Joseph will be with you to close your eyes. Notice what happens here. Jacob doesn't complain. He doesn't argue. He worships. That's how he handles this situation. He worships. And you see, Beersheba is a very important place for him because this is like the southern tip, the most distant part from where he was. And the closest thing, the next step is heading into the wilderness, heading towards Egypt. It's like that last truck stop that you have before going into a desert. And so he posts up here and he worships God and he makes sacrifices. And God meets him there. And what does he say? I will go with you. What do we see throughout this entire story with Joseph? That the Lord was present with him. Jacob's getting the same promise. That the Lord will go with him. He doesn't give him like a detailed map of exactly how this is going to go. And, that's very different than what we expect. We expect, to know everything before we take that step. He doesn't get it all. He just knows that God will be with him. God meets him there, doesn't give him a detailed map. He just says, I will be with you. That's so counterintuitive to how we operate. When we face uncertainty, our first instinct is to seek clarity. Like we need to know exactly step for step if this is going to work out for us and how it's going to work out for us. We want God to show the entire journey before we even take that first step. But Jacob shows us a better way, and it's the first mark of finishing well, and it's this. Obedience isn't about understanding the plan, it's about trusting the presence. We have that same challenge. There's moments in our lives where we step out into the darkness, moments where we step out into the wilderness. As parents, you do that. But it's trusting God every step of the way and knowing He is with you. For you, maybe you're facing in Egypt right now. Maybe it's a career change that just doesn't really make sense. Maybe it's a relationship that requires hard obedience. Maybe it's a season of life that you just never saw coming, and you're kind of freaking out. When instead you can follow Jacob's example, and you can worship, and you can know that the Lord is with you. God is saying here to Jacob, He says, I will go with you. And this is like one of my favorite parts. This entire story here. Pharaoh, grateful to Joseph, gave them the best part of the land to live in once he gets there. The most fertile, choice real estate in all of Egypt. Guess what it was called? It wasn't Mishawaka. It wasn't Elkhart. It was Goshen. It was Goshen. The very address that we're at is Goshen. And that's awesome. That's encouraging. They didn't get sent to the desert outskirts. They were given Goshen. And it wasn't just Jacob. The Bible tells us 70 people in all moved into this new amazing place. Let's move forward a little bit in the story to the next scene. Years pass. The family settled in Egypt. Jacob is now 147 years old. He's blind and he's on his deathbed. 147. Like his age spots have age spots. Like he is old. And he's on his deathbed. And he's blind, of course, because that's what happens when you get older. But he's 147 and he is struggling to be able to see. And that brings us to scene 2 in Genesis 48. Joseph brings his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to receive their grandfather's blessing. And this is kind of like a standard practice. It's a very formal kind of ceremony that happens. And, Joseph, knowing that his dad is really old and he's really blind, he's going to make it as simple as possible for him. And what was standard was that the oldest son, is blessed with the right hand, the hand of favor, right? And then the next son would be blessed with less favor and be the left hand. And so Joseph tries to make this real easy, and he gets Manasseh and he puts him right in front of the right hand of Jacob. Then he takes Ephraim and he moves him right in front of the left hand, ready to go. But Jacob does something shocking. He crosses his hands. It's a bizarre thing. And Joseph's concerned by this. He doesn't like this at all. Actually, look at verse 17 through 20. It says, "But Joseph was upset when he saw that his father placed his right hand on Ephraim's head. So he lifted it to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. 'No, my father,' he said, 'this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused. 'I know, my son, I know,' he said. 'Manasseh will also become a great people, but his younger brother will become even greater, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations.' So Jacob blessed the boys that day." See, Joseph tries to correct his elderly blind father. He's like, "You're doing it wrong. Like, you're going to mess this up, Dad. It's a big deal." And what's happening here, you can just read right past this, guys. Like, but this is so powerful, what's happening here. Because Jacob's name means deceiver. And if you know Jacob's story, like, his story starts off with deceiving his blind father into getting the blessing. He deceived his brother and, to buying out that birthright from him. Like, that's his story that's taken place. He was a manipulator. And so when this is happening, man, Joseph's like, "Not again." Like, the way we started this story was because Jacob was showing favoritism. That's how we started this entire story. And so Joseph's like, "Oh my God, here we go again." Didn't learn his lesson, but this is so different. What's happening here is so different. The Lord was with him. Jacob moves from manipulator to messenger in this moment. He says, "I know, my son, I know." And when I read that, there's just this redemption that I hear just washing over him. When he did that deceitful act, he ended up being in exile. He spent like 20 years away. He was afraid of his brother that was going to come and kill him. Like, it wasn't an easy life after he did that. He spent his entire life processing that. And he gets to this moment, and he's led to do the very same thing. And this is redemption on display. There's no deception. There's no scheming. There's only surrender. And we see transformation. The man who once stole a blessing through deception now gives a blessing through revelation. He's no longer the manipulator in his father's tent. He has become the messenger in his own tent. His greatest failure was redeemed into his most sacred moment of authority. And this is our second mark of finishing well. God's grace doesn't follow human rules. When we walk this out in our lives, as we finish well, that rule should apply to us. Like, God's grace doesn't follow human rules. Your legacy isn't about perfect people getting what they deserve. It's about broken people experiencing unexpected grace and having the wisdom to extend that same grace to others. Some of you need to hear this today. You're trying to earn what God wants to give freely. You're following the rules, you're checking the boxes, and you're wondering why others seem to receive blessing while you're still waiting. Jacob's crossed hands remind us that God's economy does not operate off of our merit system. The first shall be last. The weak shall be strong. The younger shall be greater. He blesses not according to our resume, but according to his mysterious and wonderful purposes. And isn't it incredible? It's actually through Ephraim's line that Joshua would come. The very one who leads God's people back into the promised land. So we move to scene 3. Jacob dies. And in Genesis 50, it might be the most revealing moment in Joseph's entire life. His brothers are terrified. Jacob's died. There's a large portion of them that's like, okay, like Joseph was just keeping it all together so he didn't give Dad a heart attack. But now Dad's gone. Now he's going to lay the hammer down. Now we're getting thrown in jail. Now he's going to have us killed. Like, this is all going to change for us. They think to themselves, now that Dad's gone, Joseph's going to pay us back. And look at their fear and Joseph's response in verses 15 through 21. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong we did to him, they said. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. Look, we are your slaves, they said. But Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. See that? Joseph wept. Like, he was heartbroken that his brothers couldn't get it through their head that he had already forgiven them. That God was doing something so much greater than they could even see. They thought his forgiveness was like this temporary strategy that he was scheming, that it wasn't the permanent condition of his soul. And he speaks those famous words that can kind of summarize this entire story. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. And this is the third mark of finishing well. Your past doesn't get the final word. God's purpose does. As you finish well, it's recognizing there's nothing in your life, there's nothing in your past, there's nothing in someone else's past that God cannot redeem, that God cannot use. There's no door thick enough that he cannot kick down. And as we finish well, we have to live that way. Joseph isn't ignoring the pain. He's not pretending the pit never happened. He's reframing the entire story through the lens of God's sovereignty, that God knew what he was doing. And when we look at our own lives, we have to recognize God is sovereign, that God knows what he is doing. Some of you are still carrying hurts that feel fresh. The wound may be years old, but the sting is still there. You're waiting for an apology that may never come. Or you've received an apology and you just don't even know if you can fully trust the person who has given it to you. Joseph shows us that true forgiveness isn't based on others' worthiness, it's based on God's character. Because of this, we can know that God can forgive. And because God can forgive, we can forgive. It's making the choice to believe that no part of your story is beyond the reach of God's redemption. Finally, we come to the last scene. And Joseph himself is on his deathbed. He's only 110. He didn't quite make it as long as his dad. But he has wealth, power, and success beyond anything he could have imagined. And that young dreamer in Canaan could ever have saw it. But listen to his final words here in Genesis 50, 20 through 25. Soon I will die, Joseph told his brothers, but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath. And he said, when God comes to help you and lead you back, you must take my bones with you. His last act is one of defiant hope. He's saying, don't bury me here. Like, this is not home. And that's kind of bizarre. Because you think about Egypt's where everything went well for him, right? Like, it was the rags to riches story. All of his success happened in Egypt. He had power, wealth, authority. He got married in Egypt. He had his sons in Egypt. But he says, this isn't my home. Don't bury me here. Don't let my story end in Egypt. My hope isn't in the house that I built, the wealth that I accumulated. My hope is in something far greater, something to come. And church, what happens next? Generations pass. A new Pharaoh kind of comes into play. And in fact, the Israelites become a great nation just as God had promised. So great that the Egyptians feared them. And they enslaved them. And they oppressed them. Then God called Moses, and as Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt after the 10 plagues, he fulfilled that ancient vow. Look at Exodus 13:19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear to do this. He said, God will certainly come to help you. When he does, you must take my bones with you from this place. But the story doesn't end there. Moses led them out of Egypt, but it was actually Joshua who finally led them into the promised land. And Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim, Joseph's grandson, the very one Jacob had blessed with his crossed hands. Look at Joshua 24:32. The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob had bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor. The circle was complete. The promise made to Abraham was kept. The blessing spoken over Ephraim was fulfilled, and the prophecy declared by Joseph on his deathbed came true centuries later in the very land that his father had purchased. And this is the final mark of finishing well. A life of faith ends by pointing to God's future. Joseph's bones became a symbol. For 400 years, through slavery and oppression, that coffin served as a reminder. This isn't home. God promised more. Our story isn't over. Joseph's story ends with a promise and a request. God will come to help you. Don't leave me here. So when we come to communion, remember that God has already come to help. The greater Joseph, Jesus, every week we've shown how the story of Joseph is actually just a foreshadow of Jesus. It's all pointing to Jesus. Jesus was betrayed like Joseph. He suffered like Joseph. He forgave like Joseph. But unlike Joseph, Jesus didn't just point to future salvation. He accomplished it. The bread and the cup remind us that our story finds its meaning in his story. That our pain finds its purpose in his cross. That our hope rests not in our ability to survive Egypt, but in his power to lead us home. As we prepare to take communion together, let me read the words from 1 Corinthians 11:23-26. For I pass on to you what I received from the Lord himself. On the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup of wine after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. For every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are announcing the Lord's death until he comes again." So at this time, as a church, we are going to come together and we're going to do communion together. We're going to start at the front, and you can kind of come forward and grab the bread and the cup. And then I ask that you go back to your seat and just reflect on what that means. And then we'll take it together as the church.